Hello, my name is Chris Wright. I'm co-leader of Alexandria Tea Party in Virginia. Welcome to our 8th annual Independence Day celebration. We won't stop until every American celebrates Independence Day by brushing up on our nation's founding principles. Our theme this year is The Constitution Matters. We remember chanting that in front of the Supreme Court when the Obamacare case was being heard. We were outnumbered that day. The Constitution did not matter to most of the people who were there. We hope you come away from our presentation today with a new appreciation for why the Constitution absolutely does matter to every American, every day. We'll open with the National Anthem and Pledge of Allegiance. Then we'll move to readings from our nation's founding documents, the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. We'll throw in the Gettysburg Address for good measure. Then we'll have commentators who will share their thoughts with us on why the Constitution matters. They come at it from a variety of perspectives, but they all agree the country would be better off if more Americans knew our founding principles, and those principles were more faithfully observed. We'll sprinkle in some quotes from our founders and other great Americans. We'll wrap up with Alexandria Tea Party's very own instant graduate degree in political science. And we'll close with a rendition of America the Beautiful. All of the readings for today are on alexandriateaparty.com. Go to the button bar, select projects, go to the very first one, 4th of July project, and links to the readings are there. And now, our national anthem.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In free governments, the rulers are the servants, and the people their superiors and sovereigns. Benjamin Franklin.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
About the Declaration there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward towards the time where there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern, but more ancient than those of the Revolutionary Fathers. We live in an age of science and abounding accumulation of material things. These did not create our Declaration. Our Declaration created them. Calvin Coolidge.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years. Article 3, Section 1. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Article 5. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. The First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state in which they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of laws.
Give all power to the many, and they will oppress the few. Give all power to the few, they will oppress the many. Both, therefore, ought to have power that each may defend itself against the other. Alexander Hamilton.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met in a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth.
A constitution of government once changed from freedom can never be restored. Liberty once lost is lost forever. John Adams.
No free government or the blessings of liberty can be preserved to any people but by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue, and by frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. Those words, penned in May 1776 by Virginian George Mason and enshrined in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, are as true today as they ever were. Our republic was built upon principles. They are embodied in the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, as well as our Constitution, the four documents declared by Congress to be our nation's organic law. But what are these fundamental principles, and how exactly should we frequently recur to them, as Mason suggested? First, it is obvious from recent polls taken of average Americans that such a recurrence is long overdue. 33% of Americans have no idea even what rights the First Amendment guarantees, let alone the principles upon which those rights are established. The principle of federalism is fundamental to our constitutional order. How many Americans, however, can define, let alone discuss, federalism today? Inalienable rights as an endowment from our Creator are a fundamental principle found in the Declaration. How many Americans still believe inalienable rights come from God rather than from government? According to the Northwest Ordinance, religion, morality, and knowledge are necessary ingredients to good government. Remove one or more from the landscape and good government cannot result. The Confederation Congress set aside land for schools in this new territory that would eventually become the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, so that these three topics could be taught in those schools. When our schools have abandoned the teaching of two of these three topics, can good government still result? Although the Articles of Confederation were largely a failure and soon replaced, Article 2 stated that each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right not expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. This principle was carried forward into the Constitution via the 10th Amendment. Yet we have in large part abandoned this idea, this principle. Some today are even pushing us towards seeing the states as mere administrative units of the federal government. There are many, many more fundamental principles we have forgotten or largely abandoned that are found in our founding documents. Checks and balances, separation of powers, government as the security of rights, that all men are created equal. These are just a few. To Mason, they included justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue. For Mason's justice, we often substitute special rights for favored political groups. We allow government to take private property from individuals and give it to corporations who will make more productive use of it. For moderation, we substitute a culture of conspicuous consumption. For temperance, we substitute, if it feels good, do it. We have replaced Mason's frugality with $20 trillion in official government debt, $11.85 trillion in consumer debt, $918.5 billion in credit card debt, $8.09 trillion in mortgage debt, and $1.19 trillion in student loan debt, up 5.9% from last year. This, of course, ignores our trillions in unfunded promises. Instead of pursuing virtue, we have aborted 50 million unborn babies. We have told little boys they can become little girls, and vice versa, through cosmetics, hormone treatments, and a new wardrobe. We have become an America whose largest export to the rest of the world is pornography. Constitution framer James Wilson, in his 1791 Lectures on Law, wrote, "There is not in the whole science of politics a more solid or a more important maxim than this, that of all governments those are the best which by the natural effect of their constitutions are frequently renewed or drawn back to their first principles." If Mason and Wilson were right, and I think they were, if free government and the blessings of liberty cannot be preserved if we ignore or fail to be drawn back to our nation's fundamental principles, then we can predict disastrous results. Those of us who would like to see this nation not fail have work to do, each and every one of us. Where do we begin? We begin by each of us diligently studying, discussing, and thoroughly understanding our foundational documents and the principles they espouse. And then we insist on a continuing national dialogue over these principles with people who agree with us and those who do not, people on both sides of the political divide. This 4th of July, let's each commit to study and understand our nation's fundamental principles, to explain them to others, and to insist that our nation return to them. I'm Gary Porter, Executive Director of the Constitution Leadership Initiative, and it was my honor to bring you this short message.
This is no time for the friends of freedom to fold their arms and to consider their work at an end. The price for liberty is eternal vigilance. Frederick Douglass.
Hi, Devin Watkins. Today it is believed by many that Congress can spend money on whatever it wishes. This was not the original understanding of the founders. I ask you to think back to February 6, 1792, less than 2 years after Rhode Island had ratified the Constitution. It was proposed that Congress give money to cod fishermen, which were having a variety of economic problems. James Madison went to the floor of the House of Representatives and gave the following speech with some slight abridgments. It is supposed by some gentlemen that Congress had the authority not only to grant bounties in the sense used here, as communication for drawbacks, but even to grant them under a power by virtue of which they may do anything that they think conducive to the general welfare. This, sir, in my mind, raises an important and fundamental question, whether the general terms which have been cited are to be considered as a sort of caption or general description of the specific powers, and as having no further meaning and giving no further power than was found in that specification, whereas an abstract and indefinite delegation of power extending to all cases whatever, to all such at least as will admit the application of money, which is given as much latitude as any government could well desire. I, sir, have always conceived, and I believe those who propose the Constitution conceived, and it is still more fully known and material to observe that those who ratified the Constitution conceived, that it is not an indefinite government deriving its power from the general terms prefixed with the specific powers, but a limited government tied down to the specific powers which explain and define the general terms. The gentlemen who contend for a contrary conclusion, a contrary doctrine, are surely not aware of the consequences which flow from it, in which they must either admit or give up their doctrine. It will follow, in the first place, that if the such terms be taken in the broad sense would maintain the specific particular powers afterwards so carefully and distinctly enumerated would be without meaning and must go for nothing. It would be absurd to say first that Congress may do whatever they please, and then they may only do this or that particular thing. After giving Congress the power to raise money and apply it to all the purposes which they may pronounce necessary to the general welfare, it would be absurd, to say the least, to superadd the power to raise armies, to provide for fleets. In fact, the meaning of the general terms in question must either be sought in the subsequent enumeration, which limits and details them, or convert the government into one of limited, and hereto supposed to enumerated powers, into a government without any limits at all. It is to be recollected that the terms common defense and general welfare, as here used, are not novel terms first introduced in the Constitution. They are terms familiar in their construction and known well to the people of America. They are repeatedly found in the old Articles of Confederation, where, although they are susceptible to great latitude, as can be given them by their context here, it was never supposed or pretended that they were conveyed any such power as now assigned to them. On the contrary, it was always considered clear and certain that the old Congress was limited to the enumerated powers, and that the enumeration limited and explained the general terms. I asked the gentlemen themselves whether it was ever supposed or suspected that the old Congress could give away the monies of the states and bounties to encourage agriculture for any other purpose they pleased. If such a power had been possessed by that body, it would have been much less impotent, or would have borne a very different character from that universally ascribed to it. There are consequences, sir, still more extensive, which, as they follow clearly from the doctrine combated, must either be admitted or the doctrine must be given up. If Congress can apply money indefinitely to the general welfare, and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take care of religion in their own hands. They may establish teachers in every state, county, parish, and pay them out of the public treasury. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. They may undertake the regulation of all roads other than post roads. In short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of police would be thrown under the power of Congress. For every object I mentioned would admit the application of money. It might be called, if Congress pleased, provisions for the general welfare. In short, sir, without going further into this subject, which I should not give here touched on at all but for the reasons already mentioned, I venture to declare it is my opinion that were the powers of Congress to be established in the latitude contended for, it would subvert the very foundation and transmute the very nature of limited government established by the people of America, and what inference might be drawn or what consequences ensue from such a step, it is incumbent upon all of us well to consider. Congress amended the bill, striking out any bounty and making clear that it was only a drawback for money already paid and not a bounty. As it was no longer a bounty, James Madison then voted for the final bill. It wasn't until 1937, case of Harding v. Davis, 145 years later, that the Supreme Court ignored this and refused to limit the powers of Congress to spend money as a enumerated power in the Constitution. Thank you.
The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. James Madison.
A couple of years ago, I had a dinner party where I invited a guy I knew to be a liberal. During the conversation, he casually mentioned, "We need a living, breathing Constitution." I said in reply, "We already have a living, breathing Constitution. It's been amended 27 times, and the procedure for amending it is right there in the Constitution itself. Thanks to constitutional amendments, slavery is abolished, everyone has equal protection under the laws, and women have the right to vote. Those are big changes. You often hear nowadays that amending the Constitution is too hard. Well, a story appeared this year that gives the lie to that assertion. There was a college student who learned that one of the first proposed amendments some 200 years ago was to prevent Congress from voting itself an immediate pay raise. Well, the student thought that was a pretty good idea and began to drum up support all by himself. It only took him 10 years to get through the entire process, and now the 27th Amendment is the law of the land. So, when you hear that it's too hard to amend the Constitution, don't you believe it. All it takes is a good idea and some perseverance. I've thought of some other responses to this living, breathing thing since my dinner party. Every time you criticize the government, every time you vote for your elected representatives, and every time you enjoy an adult beverage, the Constitution lives and breathes. Why? Because our right to free speech and our entire structure of government, with elected representatives instead of dictators, are protected by the Constitution. First, the Constitution also accommodates large social changes. First, we could drink alcohol in this country. Then we couldn't because of a constitutional amendment, prohibition. And then we could again because we got rid of prohibition through another constitutional amendment. Another major social change was the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. The position of women in society had obviously changed, for the better, and the Constitution was amended accordingly. So don't let anyone tell you that we need a living, breathing Constitution to accommodate social change. It's not true. There are some other things wrong with this living, breathing nonsense. First of all, consider the source. The phrase traces back to Woodrow Wilson, who was one of the first to talk about a living Constitution. When he was president, Woodrow Wilson resegregated the federal government. Blacks could only work there in separate offices. When a delegation of black people went to the White House to complain, Woodrow Wilson said to them, "Segregation is a benefit, not a humiliation." This was well after the 14th Amendment guaranteeing equal protection of the laws had been passed. Woodrow Wilson could not have been more wrong, but we can see what kind of living, breathing Constitution he would declare on matters of race if it were up to him. Segregation today, who knows what else tomorrow? The magic phrase, living, breathing Constitution, may hypnotize people and sound good, but it's really just a way to cover up all kinds of hidden agendas. Next, you hear progressives say, we need a living, breathing Constitution because the Constitution is outdated, antiquated, and obsolete. My friends, liberty is never outmoded. Just because they didn't have cell phones 200 years ago doesn't mean that the founders didn't have their fingers on the central problem of political science across all time and across all geographical boundaries. How do you prevent one person or a small group of people from taking over? How do you prevent the concentration of power in too few hands that has enabled so many atrocities throughout human history? The 20th century was a century of total war, but you have to have total government before you can have total war. Just ask Hitler. Gather too much power in too few hands, and pretty soon 100 million people are dead, as happened with communism. This is why the founders divided power in our Constitution between three branches of government and between the national government and the state governments, to keep a tiny elite from taking control and ruling over the rest of us. It's also why the founders ratified a Bill of Rights, to protect us ordinary citizens from the abuses the founders knew would flow from a too powerful government. The founders might not have had cell phones, but they knew people would always need to be protected from unlawful searches and seizures in their houses and their effects, whatever those effects may turn out to be. The people who preach a living, breathing Constitution would do away with all these protections. They would substitute their own judgment and their own subjective feelings for the protections and guarantees we now enjoy under the Constitution. What feelings? Well, nobody knows, and that's a big problem with the living, breathing Constitution thing. We have no idea where the people who would be able to declare it where they would want to take us. If not the founders' principles, whose principles? If not the constitutional provisions we have, what provisions? Who knows? It would all be up for grabs. Letting one person and their friends declare we should all live under their values is essentially authoritarian. A living, breathing constitution sounds nice until you think about it, but it's really just an excuse for tyranny. Democracy under a living, breathing constitution? Forget about it. It wouldn't last for long. Right now you are free to vote, free to criticize the government, and free to take part in our democracy. You are a sovereign individual with personal rights protected by the Constitution. What part of your sovereignty would you give up to have a living, breathing constitution? Which of your rights would you sacrifice? The right to a jury trial? The right against self-incrimination? Do you really want your rights to evaporate because your masters got up one day and decided that rights were outmoded? A living, breathing constitution is a threat to your rights. Do you want your rights guaranteed or not? Another problem with the living, breathing thing is that it would lead to complete chaos. Think of it this way. Would you sign up for a living, breathing mortgage? Would you take out a mortgage on your house if you knew the bankers could change the interest rates every day just because they felt like it? Of course not. And that's why you should distrust people who talk about a living, breathing constitution. They're up to no good. Who knows what they would do or why or how often? Right now we have the rule of law under the Constitution. We know the rules of the game. Under a living, breathing constitution, we would not know the rules of the game. Heck, we wouldn't even know what game it is. There's a card game called Flux. Every so often, cards are drawn that completely change the rules of the game. Well, that's great for an evening's entertainment, but no way to run a country. There was a commune called New Harmony in Indiana in the early 1800s. They had a lot of problems and went through 7 constitutions in 4 years before they disbanded entirely. Is that what you want? Endless decrees and complete chaos ending in dissolution? We have the oldest enduring constitution on the planet. It has withstood the test of time. The Constitution may be an old idea, but it's still the best idea. Sleeping indoors with a roof over your head is an old idea too. But it sure beats sleeping in the park, don't you think? Well, I'd love to stick around, but I'm off to make some playing cards for my new game, Constitution Flux, the living, breathing crapshoot. The Woodrow Wilson card resegregates the federal government. Just kidding. The Ruth Bader Ginsburg card puts us under the South African Constitution because, as she told us, it's newer and better than our own. By the way, did she tell you about the South African president singing genocide songs on YouTube? I didn't think so. Another card will only allow climate skeptics to declare the living, breathing Constitution from now on. Another card says, forget that free speech thing. We don't need it anymore. Another one says, anyone who owns hotels can't be president. Don't like that one? Well, don't worry, because the last card says, we're not going to have a president at all. We're going to have a dictator. And the dictator will own all the hotels. Which card will be drawn first? I can't wait to play.
Experience hath shewn that even under the best forms of government, those entrusted with power have, in time, and by slow operations, perverted it into tyranny. Thomas Jefferson.
Happy 4th of July from Alexandria Tea Party. This is your instant graduate degree in political science. Too many Americans have been deliberately cut off from their heritage and no longer understand the set of ideas the country started with, or why the founders' ideals remain important today. Understand these ideas and you will know more about your country than many politicians or college graduates. These ideas are simple to grasp, yet more powerful than the mightiest army. America is a special place. It's the only country in all of human history founded on an idea, liberty. The Declaration of Independence states that you have the unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights are not something the government gives you. As an American, you are born with these rights. Some say these rights come from nature, others from God. The point is, your rights don't come from the government. What the government cannot give, it cannot take away. This is the true meaning of American Revolution, and it was truly astounding. For the first time ever, a government was instituted to protect the rights of the people, not the privileged few or those who would set them up as your overlords or masters. The purpose of the government is to protect your rights. In fact, the founders instituted a system of limited government so that your rights could never be taken away from you. Not only do your rights not come from the government, the truth is that the government rights come from us. In America, we live under the revolutionary idea that we, the people, are sovereign. The federal government has only the enumerated powers expressly set forth in the Constitution. It has only the powers we, the people, give it. Under the 9th and 10th Amendments of the Constitution, all remaining rights and powers belong to we, the people, and to the states, not to the bureaucrats or politicians in Washington. The founders were very far-sighted in instituting limited government. They knew that every now and then a charismatic demagogue would come along singing a siren song about how much the government could do for you if only you would surrender your liberty. The founders knew that somebody would always want to be King George, and the inevitable tendency of government is to grow its power and expand its reach over the people. The system of checks and balances the founders created will, if faithfully observed, forever prevent a tyrant or tyrannical government from emerging and ruling the land by personal whim or dictate. The founders' ideas are in accord with human nature and have stood the test of time. They are superior to all political theories that went before, like Mike makes right, let him eat cake, the divine right of kings, and to every political ideology that's come along since, like Marxism, socialism, and their warmed-over derivatives, liberalism, progressivism, that have destroyed liberty and failed everywhere they've been tried. So as you celebrate the 4th of July, remember the true meaning of this day and why we in America truly have cause for celebration. We, the people, are free. We live in a free country where the people are sovereign, and sadly, this has not been the case for most human beings that ever walked the earth. Congratulations, you've just graduated. Now go in liberty and cherish every minute of it. Use your freedom wisely. It's a great gift. Don't let anyone denigrate the magnificence of the founders' ideals, confuse you with sophistry, or take away your liberty without a fight. It's your heritage and your foundation as an American living in this special place we're so unbelievably fortunate to call home.
I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves, and if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion. Thomas Jefferson.
Thanks for watching. Yes, folks, the Constitution matters. Without the Constitution, we would not merely be imagining a government without limits, as James Madison did. We would be living under one. Thanks to the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, we are a sovereign, self-governing people with a government that must ask for the consent of the governed, we the people. We have a sound set of fundamental principles and should recur to them routinely, not just try to make things up as we go along. We have liberty, including the freedom to amend the Constitution. But as the founders warned, liberty once lost is lost forever. If you think the freedom we have here in America is pretty sweet, help us build a fortress around our founding ideas and protect our liberties for generations to come.